Again, this is the 2021 Lambtown Festival virtual sheep to shawl competition. This is the judging portion with our lovely judges, Kaye and Sand Luck. And thank you too for joining us. And
thank you for having us back.
Oh yeah, you did a wonderful job last year, and really looking forward to the next probably hour and a half or so here with you two, and seeing what you have to say about the shawls, and certainly ready to see who comes out on top. And then the way this will go, just so everybody knows, we will let Kaye and Sand talk a little bit about the competition, and then we're going to show a slideshow, and that'll be a handful of photos of each of the shawls. And so we'll stop after each shawl, and they'll talk a little bit about each one. And once we get through all 6 shawls from the competition, then we will have a little poll, and you guys can tell us which one is your favorite. And then we will reveal the names. So it'll be completely anonymous up to that point. Then we will reveal the names of each of the teams. And then we will get into the order of where everybody landed this year. And after that, Kaye and Sand will tell us just a little bit more about the competition and how they judged it, and then any pointers that they have for next year. And finally, we'll close with some Q&A. So, anybody who was on a team and wants to know maybe a particular question, feel free to pop those into the chat, as well as if you have questions about the judging in general. So the Q&A is the best place for that. And I see we already have one here. Chris says this is her first time watching Sheep to Shawl. Will we go over the process? And absolutely. Kaye and Sand, do you want to do that, or do you want me to do that?
We can do that.
Okay, why don't you guys do it? I will go ahead and spotlight you two. And if you could tell us a little bit about the competition. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the history of it as well, and then maybe your judging process. And when you're ready, let me know, and we'll start the photo part.
Okay.
There we go.
So sheep to shawls, historically, we think of them today as kind of a luxury. It's a fun competition, a chance to get a team together and play. But there is a historic background of sheep to shawls actually helping choose communities that had the most marketable skills. Think about a day and age when shawls became an essential part of wardrobes to keep you warm in layers. And so finding a community that actually had the highest level of spinners and weavers, and a combination, because it takes a team to do this, was really important for the marketability and the financial viability of a community. So this is really a lot more than just a fun get together and spin for an afternoon and produce a shawl, which is kind of how the modern in-person sheep to shawl works today. So things we look for are, is the resulting shawl marketable? Can the team meet the requirements for the size of the piece? That's very important in terms of not wasting resources, continually having things that are the wrong size all the time. They don't meet a commission's requirement. Having a team work together. Can the community work together? Can the spinners produce to a specification and actually have something that is wearable, durable, meets the requirement for any colors or patterns that have been requested,
and just generally consistent in the production of the yarns and in the weaving. So when we look at a sheep to shawl today, we're looking at starting with a loom that has been warped but not woven on at all.
not even headers.
This particular competition and many competitions give you a few extra points if you actually hand spin your warp. That stage is the stage in which you do your calculations. You figure out how wide you need to warp your loom to make sure that with draw-in you're going to have a shawl that meets the size specifications. You arrive at the sheep to shawl, or in this case, you log into the Zoom account when you have organized how you're going to actually produce your shawl. It starts with a fleece that is cleaned or scoured and can be dyed, because that's one of the places where you can dye your fleece is actually at the scour stage. And then all of the processing of that fleece occurs during the sheep to shawl, the carding, the spinning, the plying, and then it's wound onto bobbins for the weaver. And the shawl is woven, and it all has to take place in 28 hours of work time, combining all the work time for all the participants. And you can have, I believe it's like 2 to 6 or 7, 2 to 7 participants. Sheep to shawls are, they happened first in Europe and it was moved to the US. But they are definitely a European tradition.
So when we talk about number of team members, a traditional number to support a weaver is 7 spinners to the weaver. And that number goes all the way up the line. 7 spinners to the weaver, 7 weavers to the tailor, 7 tailors to the king. That's actually how the how did the 7 met a man going
the
to
St. Ives
run? Yes. 7 wives, 7 bags, 7 cats. That's actually about how many layers of support it takes to support the top level of your hierarchy, whatever that is.
So that's like most rhymes, traditional nursery rhymes. It's talking about,
It's a teaching moment.
yeah, and a lot of them are fiber related, textile related. So that's always an interesting thing.
Yes, when you talk about top goes the weasel, you're talking about going around the wool weasel, because it would count a certain number of rotations, which has slipped my mind right now. But the sound that it makes when it hits that number of rotations to tell you have so many lengths, meters, yards, depends on the country. And historically would have been yards or cubits,
something like that.
and that pop tells you you've reached a certain multiple. And so that's the pop goes the weasel, which is why those are called yarn weasels or winding weasels.
And then you have a weaver's quarter. So at any rate, that's the mechanism of how we get to where we get. When all of those shawls are turned in, because we're doing this virtually, they end up getting turned in rather than actually having the judges walk through the participants as they weave, which is the more traditional way of doing it. But in this instance, they get turned in, and then they get special courier down to us. And
Thanks, Henry.
and Colton.
Oh, yes.
Then we actually take them all out, print out our sheets, read through the parameters one more time just to make sure everything's clear. And we start at the beginning and we pull each shawl out and we spend about 15 to 20 minutes per shawl in reviewing all of the criteria, which is
keep it to that, because in the in-person you wouldn't have 20 minutes would be the maximum we had to discuss each shawl. Realistically, it could be
less.
5 minutes. Yeah, if you have a lot of shawls in a certain period of time in person, you wouldn't have very long to go.
But we're lucky and we actually are able to take a little bit more time, but we do limit that because we want to make it fair. We want to give the same amount of time to each shawl, and also we don't want to get, in that space where you're nitpicking all crazy like. So so we want to control for both of those things. Anything else?
We're ready to go.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to talk briefly. We won't talk about this until we get to the end, but one of the first, actually, I think the very first thing that we do when a shawl goes on the table to judge is measure it to see if it meets the minimum requirements. And we won't talk about those widths and lengths, both of which count, until the end, but that is the first thing that happens. So we do need to keep that in mind.
And we'll talk a little bit more about some ways in which you can be successful in making sure that your shawl meets the criteria, both in terms of size and in terms of your spinning and weaving. So we'll have a little conversation about that at the end. So Roy, whenever you're ready, we're ready to roll with the shawls.
Okay, let me go ahead and get this up here. All right, we're going to start with a look at all of the shawls. And this will roll for a little bit. And then we'll go into a view of shawl from team number 1.
This shawl has a very interesting combination of pattern and color. Unfortunately, the busyness of the color, there were too many colors to really show the pattern up well. And the differences in tension that you can see in the close-up here cause it to disappear even more so. There are places where what should be a little round figure are kind of squashed, a little oval, and other places where they're not elongated, and you can see some of the elongation here. And that it met the criteria for the ends per inch, which is how many ends there are per inch in the reed. And the criteria, it met the minimum for the picks per inch. That's how many times you throw the shuttle across in a given inch. Both warp and weft are hand spun. The warp and weft were both hand dyed using acid dyes. As you can see from the screen here, you can see a treadling error and or a beat error where there's an elongation. And again, we've got so much color the eye can't really see it. The warp yarns were spun fairly consistently. They look like they're balanced. The weft yarns, they walked around a bit, and that's causing some of the change in the size of the bead.
Now you can see right here, as you look at the end, one of the problems that happened as this one was woven was there wasn't enough waste yarn used. So the first 3 inches of the shawl are an inch wider than the remaining part of the whole remaining length of the shawl. And that generally happens when the warp threads are still spread too far apart. And that's controlled by adding a little bit more waste yarn at the beginning so that you bring everything into balance and your selvages remain even for the length of the shawl.
And you can see here the selvages, you can see a little bit of it at the edge. The selvages are uneven. The weaver needed to take a little bit more time. Sometimes it's worth slowing down in order to get a better quality product. And so there are some loops at the edges. There are treadling errors. The selvages are a bit uneven. There are pick errors, which is where the shuttle went over or under a thread it shouldn't have, which disrupts the pattern even further.
Now, this is the beauty of this shawl. This shawl was finished fantastically. You can see that the hem stitching is right exactly along the fell line. It doesn't have much in the way of buckling. It sits really evenly. And the fringe is twisted and it sits right up next to the fell line. So it's really even at the top and it's pretty even at the bottom. So the knotting was done really well.
And getting a good fringe twist, really a neat skill. And so whoever did the fringe twisting, bravo, you did a great job. The fabric is a little heavy for a shawl, but the drape is still good. So overall, the hand in wearing would be quite pleasant. And it would, in fact, twist around. So despite the fact the yarn's a little heavy, they do actually have nice, what's called crushability, which means you can wrap it around your shoulders and it'll probably stay there. You have anything else on this one? More waist yarn? Yep.
Yep, I think that's it for this one.
Good offering.
Yeah. Okay. And that was good timing because that was right at the end of the last photo. So you got it. Okay. All right.
We do try.
Yeah, that was excellent. So let me queue up the next one.
Okay.
So the next one is team two. Team two. Okay.
So this shawl is woven completely out of Jacob, which is one of those sort of intermediate choices in terms of fibers that you would choose for a next to skin kind of shawl. However, they did a really beautiful job of choosing how to place the colors. Jacobs typically are tricolored, so splitting out and being able to actually control for how you place those colors in the shawl was really very well done.
And to that note, whoever picked the fibers out of the Jacob fleece, because Jacob typically has 3 or maybe more different grades of wool, whoever picked the actual pieces of the fleece to use did a nice job, because the hand on the shawl was reasonably good. Here's where we get to talk about natural color and how it interferes. Even in natural colors, it can interfere with pattern. You can see from this picture, the dark areas show the pattern. A nice, relatively simple pattern. Good choice for a situation like this, because a good solid pattern that you can see is great for the weaver. However, the lighter areas, there's so much twisting in the colors together, which is called marling, that it disrupts the pattern. It's very hard to see from a distance. And it's a shame in that respect, because I love natural colored fleeces, and a little bit different choices in how those singles were applied together and then how they were placed in the warp would have made the pattern more visible. And let's see. Yeah, it obscures the marling obscures the pattern, and you have to be aware of that when you choose for marled yarns. There is some inconsistencies in the diameter of the warp yarn. It is less inconsistent than the weft yarn. The weft yarn is inconsistent, and so that also is disrupting the pattern, because the size of the pattern changes, and then the eye can't keep up and follow the line of the pattern that's been chosen.
And this kind of goes back to how you work as a team. And one of the challenges of doing a sheep to shawl is you have 6 spinners, up to 6 spinners, who are all spinning singles. And then, you end up with one plier, and everyone has to be able to spin singles to roughly the same diameter and roughly the same twist angle in order to get a balanced yarn to go to the weaver. This particular one, again, very nice finishing. It does have a very balanced weave structure. So the EPI and PPI are the same. So it creates a very lovely balance. And it's been knotted at the fell line, and all of the knots are sitting up nice and tight against the fell line. So you have a really nice even fringe at the bottom.
And you can see from this picture that the beat is very consistent throughout the shawl. So the weaver did a really good job in terms of beat there. The selvage is a little uneven, but the beat's so consistent and the weave structure is balanced. So that again contributes to a really nice hand. You can see in the photo on the left-hand side, if you look at that lovely crease that's formed in that fold, you can see that this shawl has a beautiful hand, and it was a lovely hand. All right.
Okay. Anything else about that shawl?
That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on to shawl from Team 3.
I have a dance workout in my head, which is why I keep doing it.
All right. This shawl had a hand spun warp.
Hand dyed, I believe.
I'm not sure. It was not stated whether or not it was hand dyed, but
you can see from the picture on the right, look at how nice it looks on the model there. Good drape, good color placement. It just looks like something you absolutely want to crawl into.
So this really shows off what you can do if you set your warp up correctly, and you pay attention to how you're using color. So this shawl uses basically a rainbow ombre warp, and then they chose a cream wool to throw as the weft, which means that all of those colors in the warp remain clear. So you can see, and you can see here,
the pattern is so nice.
The pattern is very crisp.
Quite lovely.
You can really see it up close, but it remains clear even when you step back a bit.
The bead is good. Nothing is squashed. Nothing is elongated. And you can see from the picture on the right how amazing the finishing is. If they really, really did a nice job on the finishing edge. The fringe twisting is amazing. All so nice and even. Anybody who's tied knots on fringe knows that it's really challenging to get those at the same place.
This had really good spinning. The warp is very, very consistent. There were minor inconsistencies in the weft yarn, but it's not enough to actually disrupt the pattern.
And this is a place where choice of pattern and the work of the weaver can make up for some of that. So in every step of the making, you can accommodate and sometimes recover from minor errors in the previous part. There is the edge. Look at this edge. It's just amazing. The only thing I would say about it here is that, again, not enough waist yarn to close your gaps up at the beginning. The very beginning of the shawl is an inch wider, like the beginning 3 inches, an inch wider than the remainder of the shawl. So more waist yarn, a little extra time with waist yarn saves you this kind of thing happening. Although in this case, it doesn't disrupt from the piece. It looks like the other end of the shawl, the weaver maybe got in a little bit of a hurry and started beating a little tight and pulling the weft a little tight, but it didn't significantly reduce the width on that end. And it's a normal thing. As humans, we get in a hurry, like at the end, almost done, and then we get tighter.
This again is a heavy shawl, but the drape is really good, which you can see in this image here. So it would actually be incredibly wearable.
I do want to stress that the choice of colors here, you can do multiple colors and still have a good pattern setup. And the key is going to be practice and sampling. You really, 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 really want to spend time sampling ahead of time. Make some extra work, do some extra pieces. This team really did a nice job and made very, very good choices. Look at the drape there in that picture on the left-hand side. You can see that it's going to crush right around you, even though it's a heavier weight shawl. I would totally wear this.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And this also really speaks to making a good choice in your draft. Because you want something that's complex enough to showcase your weaver's skill, but not so complex that it's going to be fiddly and cause errors to occur easily. So, all right.
Well, that's a piece I'm just going to bring up very quickly. One of the issues why we do sheep to shawls, it's not just about getting the specifications of the customer correct. It's also about producing on time. So when someone comes to you and says, I have a big event, I want a special shawl, and my deadline for the wedding it's going to be worn at is October 1st, you have to plan for all of the pieces, all the stages to be done by October 1st. So you really have to meet that deadline. So that's part of the reason for the time limit here.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the next team? Okay.
Okay, so this is a mixed twill pattern, which means there are different patterns in each area. And the first thing that I noticed is that the patterns are not as clear as they could be because the singles were not at the highest quality we could get. The singles are overspun, and then they were slightly underplied, so there was no chance to compensate for the overspinning of the singles to get to a balanced weft. Balanced wefts will sit better in the fabric. Overspun, overplied wefts can be more durable, but balance gives you the best possible position for the weft in something like a shawl.
Now, this particular shawl, they made a really excellent choice of pattern of draft. This mixed twill means that you have this interesting shift of pattern, but it weaves with the same treadling the way through. And it gives you the opportunity to do what this particular team did, which is to add a little pop of color to separate the sections of twill. And so that is a really effective choice in choosing the draft for this.
It's a great use of a small amount of dyeing with the natural colors of the fleece. Great combination. Dyeing is work. It adds an extra piece to the whole process. And so by keeping the dyeing to a small amount, you you can use that showcase and actually use it to showcase the natural color. So I like that piece. The selvages have weft loops. The weaver either went a little too fast or needs to change how they're handling their selvages. And the bead is uneven, which also obscures the pattern. You can kind of see there's a dark line in one spot and then a white compacted line right there in a spot a couple inches above it. And I think that white line, if I recall correctly, is also a place where the weft was uneven and got larger suddenly compared to the pics before and after.
Now this shows the finishing, and unfortunately, the hem stitching on this piece was done.
It's uneven.
It's uneven. It actually, I'm guessing that was pulled too tight, because what's occurred is that it's buckled across the finish line.
Or it's just not, and the hem stitch did not get sewn in a way that popped it up against the fell line. The fell line, by the way, is the end or the beginning of the weaving. So it didn't actually tighten up there against that. Now, I will comment that since I don't believe these shawls have been wet finished, wet finishing sometimes helps with that, but a selvage, hem stitch sewn like this puts the shawl at a vulnerability status when it goes into water for wet finishing. So you need to be aware, you do need a solid hem stitch, and this one does not have that. So over time, that fringe is going to become vulnerable, and as I recall, it's not knotted on top of that.
It's not knotted on top of
Yeah.
that, so you may get crawl out on some of the fringe, because it's hem stitched but not knotted. And oftentimes people use a combination. You don't have to. Hem stitching by itself can be a perfectly fine finish, but it would need to actually sit up tight to the fell line and not buckle in this
And be
way.
more consistent, because here the hem stitching is just not consistent in how each loop was pulled up, and so that's part of what's causing the buckling. I will note on the left hand side, you'll see the drape is good, so great accommodation by the weaver to make that weft to make the fall good, the crushability good.
All right, is that it? I jumped back because
You're good,
right
you're
as it went to white, you said, "Look here." I was like, "Oh, whoops." Okay, all right.
Need to be a little faster.
Well
Not,
done.
not enough tea, folks.
Yeah, there we go. All right, let's get the
All
next
right,
bead out here.
For you tea and coffee drinkers out there, you're lucky you're getting any coherency. I'm only on my second cup. Oh yeah, there we go. Rose, pop the picture back up. On the left hand side, you can see that nice fold occurring. So it has good drape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right,
Okay.
shawl number 5. This is another natural colored shawl. It's Romney.
Let's start with Romney is not typically used for garments, especially something that might sit next to skin. And you could argue with a shawl that's going over top of other garments, but it's going to sit against the neck. And so I wouldn't normally have chosen that. And the team actually chose a more open set for this in order to accommodate that. And this is a shawl that I would love to see what it looked like after it was wet finished, because some of the instability that's coming from the very open weft would be, the very open set would be helped by wet finishing to give the fibers a chance to bloom a bit more. Warp is hand spun. I believe it's balanced.
It's very balanced spinning, actually.
Oh,
Both the singles and the plied yarn have
the pliing's a little bit loose, which needed to be tightened up a tad in order for it to have better visibility on the pattern. But overall,
pretty good, pretty solid
and
spinning.
again, look at that selvage, or look at the fell line. You can see that the finishing at that is really nice. Looks like it's going to hold up very well, and it's very attractive. So that is so important.
This one is done with a hem stitch and then a knot at the end of the hem stitch.
And the knots were nice and tight up against the fell line. So
and evenly, and they chose the right number of threads, which I really like.
oh yes, because choosing the right number of threads in your bundles, again, this is a sampling issue. Choosing the right number of threads in your bundles for good appearance, super critical. Good finishing can elevate a piece. Poor finishing can take it down, no matter how good the previous steps were.
Now this also has some weft tension errors and a little inconsistency in the beat. Again, this is something, because this is a pretty open set, this may correct largely in the wet finishing. So,
and choosing an open set was a choice to compensate for the coarseness of the Romney, but then this showcases the beautiful colors that Romney can come in. And so that's probably a good choice. The open set also gives you good drapeability.
And this particular draft and the way that they laid out the colors in the warp is very, very effective. Choosing the dark and light patterning and then working with the light.
So this is a great example of how dark and light patterning can be your friend. And in this choice, choosing wider, narrower, but consistent stripes across really highlights the pattern, the color, the fiber. I feel like it really speaks well for the fiber itself.
The other thing that I think that will be corrected when this shawl is wet finished is there's residue from whatever was used to scour this fleece. So when you actually touch this shawl, it's a little sticky.
So it needs, again, wet finishing would totally take care of that. Yeah, and I can understand sometimes when we scour fleeces, we don't take all the lanolin out. We can choose to spin it that way. There's some good reasons too.
So here you can see that this has a really nice drape to it. Interestingly, I think that the residue in the shawl is actually causing that little bit of creasing that you see. So it doesn't actually fall.
15 or 20 minutes in water would totally solve that problem.
Yeah. But yeah, otherwise.
Well done. I like this one a lot.
Okay, we can move right on to the next one.
Yep. I want to note quickly here, folks, sometimes you need to take a picture of your weaving, because I have discovered that sometimes when I'm looking at it, all my eye can see is what I either don't like or it doesn't look quite right, and the pictures can tell you a lot about how it's going to present to somebody else. Good. Team number 6, we have a quite lovely color. I just adore the warp-wise, lengthwise ombre they created here. It's very lovely. It walks from a nice gray tone to a lovely purple with shade changes. They did a really nice job with that. I'm quite pleased with it. It's a BFL and border luster, and then the warp is, and the weft is BFL, Rommeldale, and Romney, and that combination softens the hand up so that it's a little bit softer, a little bit nicer next to skin, because remember, shawls are going to go next to your neck. The beat is balanced. Some of the weft yarn was a little underplied, and there are some neeps in the yarn, so the spinners didn't take quite enough time to pull the neeps out as they were spinning. And my guess is sometimes that means there's a combination of a little bit of worsted woolen hybridizing in the spinning, and that sometimes lets neeps creep through, whereas like a true worsted draft would pop those neeps to the edge and they're really easy to pinch off. And there's all kinds of other ways to compensate for that sort of a thing.
So this shawl has a really nice even beat throughout.
It does walk around on the edges from the shawl width varies from one area to the other. We did find one pick error, and some of the ends are not trimmed off properly, so they poke their heads up. And of course, if you're wet finishing, you leave those ends untrimmed and you trim after wet finishing. So again, that might solve some of those little guys that are poking up. The selvages are a bit uneven on this one. Pattern.
Yeah, the pattern is really, really well chosen. And you noticed in the little write up there that this fleece was chosen over, this fleece was from the same sheep chosen over a number of years. So they really effectively used those colors to place. Here's the finishing detail, and this is absolutely gorgeous. This is hem stitched and twisted. And as you can see, everything sits really nice and tight up against the fell line.
Gorgeous.
The number of threads chosen to twist are perfect, so you're not getting any gapping between bundles, or it's not too tight. So this is just going to fall beautifully. Look at that.
That's a great example. Combination of the choice of finishing, elevating the piece. Absolutely. Not only is this gorgeous, it's also super functional. It's going to hold up well over many years without snagging or falling, collapsing.
And you can also see the drape of the shawl here in this image.
Yeah.
As you see the folds there, this has a really nice.
If they're too stiff, they don't fan fold like that. So that's great. And that fan fold tells you it'll go around your neck like a dream. Oh, look at the color advancing there. It's a beautiful pattern that is accessible for the weaver, but a little interest for the eye, not so much that it overwhelms the beautiful color.
You can also see in this close-up image, there's a little neat popped up at the very top of the image.
And that's just a matter of the spinner taking a teeny bit more time, unless you are planning for that specifically, because their name of yarn gone from me, but there's specifically having those neeps can be planned.
Okay. And that is our collection.
Okay, well, now that everybody has seen them, up next, we are going to launch a poll and see what everybody's favorite was. So I will launch this poll here.
And while you're doing that, we can talk a little bit about how you prepare for a sheep to shawl, so that you meet the criteria and produce something that is possibly a winner.
That because oh dear.
Okay,
All right.
because we don't get to take the poll.
No. So I want to talk a little bit while the poll is going here. I'm going to look at our time here. So I want to talk a little bit about preparation for a sheep to shawl. Oh, what a beautiful picture that is. It shows all 6 of them. And you can see that all 6 of them have nice drape. All 6 of them are wearable. That's a great choice. So first thing about preparing for a sheep to shawl is practice. Practice, practice, practice. And out of practice comes sampling. Sample, sample, sample. I promise the effort put in to do some sample dyeing, sample spinning, short warp to sample the weaving, you're going to be so much happier with your results at the other side, and you won't have surprises. And I'll use a personal story we had where I did not actually sample a waffle weave towel going onto the loom. And when we pulled it off, we realized that I had planned for them to be about 30% longer than makes sense for any kind of dish towel.
So, and what we did was we actually wove the first towel, took it off the loom, washed, dried,
actually
did the whole
cut
thing.
it all the way off.
And as a result, we now have a towel in our own personal stash that went into the bath towel section. And then I finished weaving the rest of the towels, which were actually a commission for a client. If we had not done that, if we had not pulled that towel off and actually done a sample and completely wet finished that thing and measured it against what we had measured right off the loom,
We would have had, the client would have gotten bath towels instead of dish towels.
I would have basically woven a whole nother set of towels for them, which is, you know, nobody wants to do that. So one of the things that I will say is that the sheep to shawl criteria do not change very much from year to year.
Or
so
even from sheep to shawl to sheep to shawl. Oh, and quick comment about sheep to shawls. This one, and many of them today, start with a worked loom. In some areas, they have what's called a fleece to, oh gosh, name gone for me. Anyway, it's a longer event, often 3, 4, 7 days, where it starts with shearing the sheep. I mean, it's a whole week-long event. So where the sheep to shawl starts can vary, especially from country to country.
but certainly in the US and certainly in most of the sheep to shawls that most of us are likely to run into, the criteria are very similar. And this means that you can start practicing now. You can go home, if you want to do this next year, you can go home, read the rules, and start playing right now and figuring out what it is you might want to do.
And for the teams who participated this year, take your judging sheets, please take those comments, go home, practice on those things. They are meant as educational comments. And for new teams, you know, that this kind of criteria is available out there. This video can help you figure out some of what you're looking for in terms of those practice things.
So you want to start by, one of the things you can tell from sampling is when you have fabric on the loom, it is under tension. And this becomes a very critical component. When you take it off the loom, it does what's called draw in, because you've now removed the tension.
It's a rubber
So
band.
if you calculate, so sampling is the most accurate way of figuring this out. How does it measure on the loom, and how does it measure when you removed it from the loom? And that gives you the percentage of draw in. That piece of information will give you the information on how wide you need to pull your warp so that you don't under spec your width. And it will also give you information on how long you need to pull your warp.
Because you neither want to pull a warp that's too short to produce the cloth length that you're expected to produce, nor do you want to pull it so long that you have a lot of extra warp, which you can always make something out of. But at the same time, you don't, if you're meeting a commission, you want to make sure you have enough warp to do that piece, and you're not trying to get, you're not ending up with waste, because that increases the cost of the shawl.
Also, just in terms of competition, if you put a warp on that's too long, it's very easy to just keep weaving until you reach the end of the warp, which, I mean, if you make it within the time frame is not a bad thing, because too long is not a disqualifying event.
Although I really want,
but it can cause you to not finish in time,
yeah,
because you're not sure how far you've gone.
So one of the keys there is the skill of measuring the warp on the loom, measuring the weaving on the loom. And I have a real simple trick we'll talk about in the last little bit in terms of how to do that, so that you can, well, where are we with the poll, Roy?
Yeah, so, yeah, okay, I'm live. All right. So we had about half the people responded, a little bit more than that. And of that, team 3 was the overwhelming favorite with 49% of the votes. So yeah, so they really liked that one. So if you want, we can move ahead. The next steps here is we will reveal the team names, and we can do that, and then get into all the placements. And then if you want to continue talking about techniques and things like that, we can put that in on the end. Okay, so let's do that. We will go back to a screen share here, and you guys will get, everybody will get a little bit of time here to see all 6 shawls.
I just wanted to be reminded.
And there we go. So there are all 6 shawls with their team names, and then we'll fade out after just a little bit here, and we'll come back, and I should say this is the team numbers, and when we come back, you will see their team names. So that'll happen in just a second.
So we'll be starting with the shawls that disqualified, correct?
Correct, we will.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So.
okay, so I just need to pull them up in a, I don't always remember the team. Team number. I'll remember the shawl itself, but then I have, what team number was that?
Okay, got it.
Okay.
All right.
So let's start with 6. We'll go on.
Yeah. So hold on just for a second here, Kaye and Sand. Yeah. We're gonna.
So we can show.
This slide is a little bit longer than I thought.
That's okay. That's okay.
There we go.
It's such a beautiful picture to show them. Oh, look, we have white screen.
Yep.
Yep.
It's coming up.
There we
There we
go.
go.
All right.
All right. So there's the big reveal, everybody, of the team names. And as I said in the poll, team 3 was the overwhelming favorite.
Okay.
Not much of a surprise, as they were the winners from last year. So before we get into placement, I would like to make a plug for Lambtown Festival admission. If you are enjoying this, we are a nonprofit, and we do request $5 per day admission. You can pay that through the website at lambtown.org/admissions. You can also head to the admissions tab in the Lambtown Festival app. And that link is also in the chat right now. So you can just click on that and pop on over. If you are a big fan and a super supporter, we have some super supporter levels, which the next, I think we're down to 20 or so people will get a little bit of special Lambtown Festival swag for checking out with one of those. So there's a few options there over at lambtown.org/admission, and we certainly appreciate you helping us keep the festival going. So with that said, let me hit the play button here and we'll roll through, and slide will pop up in just a little bit.
Enjoy the lovely view.
Enjoy the view here for now, and a slide will pop up in just a little bit with the disqualification.
Okay, we're going to start with team number 6, which is the shawl on the rightmost side.
That beautiful purple to gray jobber.
I'm so very sad that it disqualified, because it's a beautiful presentation. Loved the colors, the finishing. It's the one where I went on at some length about how good the finishing is. But
However, it's only 17 inches wide, and the minimum requirement is 19. So this is a planning issue for this team. Do some sampling, make sure that you actually get enough warp on your loom.
and you have to got to do some math here, folks. I'm very sorry for, I know people who are a little phobic about that. You have to do some math, and the sampling would have given them the answer on how much math needed to be done. It just went on the loom too narrow, and that disqualified. It was plenty long, 74 inches in a weaving width. I really wanted to be able to place this one. It's just a lovely piece, and I would totally purchase this shawl. So please keep practicing, guys. This is Spin City.
Yes.
Yeah, Spin City, keep going, practice, do some sampling, figure out what that drawing is, and get your warp wide enough. You did such a nice job.
Yeah, very excited to have them join us this year from New York. So really cool to have them.
So team number 4, and I've lost the name, Roy.
I don't remember off the top of my head either. Are we talking about the black and pink one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Which, by the way,
Mount Lass and Lassies.
okay, Mount
Okay.
Lass. So in real life, it's actually shades of cream and taupe and brown, or what's often called black in terms of natural color for sheep, I believe. It's like a dark chocolate and pink stripes. So this shawl, the singles being overspun.
Well, the thing that disqualified it
Oh, yes.
actually is that it's 66 inches long. It needed to be 72 inches long, so it missed the mark by quite a bit. And I'm guessing that part of this is a calculation error, that just not enough warp was put onto the loom. And
The beat isn't even, so that's affecting it.
the other thing that could happen is if the team was running out of time and stopped, so they would have something to submit.
And the yarn in the weft being overspun and underplied, which means it's unbalanced, also caused more draw in lengthwise, because it springs. It doesn't have a good balance to just lay, so it's affecting the way the cloth sits as well. And that may actually have had an issue with the length. And I want to just very briefly talk about a trick for making sure you have enough length on the loom. First of all, choose your length that you need to go. In this case, it was 72 inches minimum for the weaving portion, the actual woven cloth. And you want to plan your warp, and you'll have a more accurate number after you sample, to be 10 to 15% longer. The weaving itself needs to be 10 to 15% longer than your planned final length. And in order to then have a number that you track on the loom, you need to use a tape measure, or a trick I have learned from a teacher, Deborah Jarko, about taking a grosgrain ribbon, take the time to mark it with dots and like 5-inch or 6-inch intervals, whatever works for your head, where I have a number. So dot, 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 5, dot, 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 10. And I actually pin that along and unpin it as I go, so that I know exactly how long I've woven on the loom. And that would solve many of these shawls that have disqualified. It would solve their length problem.
And it's really, you can also use a light clip if you don't want to use a pin.
Yeah, the little quick clips from sewing are terrific for that.
So, but it's a great way to kind of keep track of where you are.
And you don't wind that tape onto the beam, by the way, folks. Don't do that. That'll change your tension. Okay. Next one that's disqualified is team number 2.
This is the Meridian Jacob team.
And again, it disqualified on length. It measures 69.5 inches long. And I will say, folks, when you measure, please make sure that you are measuring on a slick surface. Do not measure your shawls
On the carpet.
Yeah, or like for knitting, I use blocking boards to block out lace shawls, and the stuff I have has a little carpeting on the top, so you can actually stick the shawl kind of to it. Do not measure for length that way. That stuff, you can just fool yourself into smoothing it out and making it wider or longer than it actually is. You need to be on a slick surface where the fibers draw up to wherever they're going to relax, because that's going to be your true length and width. So this one at 69.5 inches long was too short and disqualified on that basis.
And only a little bit too short. So
Yeah, and if I can jump in there, I know that the paperwork on this one said, I think she had measured it at 70 or 70.5 inches when it needs to be 72. And so, I mean, she knew, getting it off and measuring it. I was like, oh, I didn't quite make it, but you got to send it in anyways, because I mean, right, like it's a lovely shawl. You got to send it in to be judged.
And this is the case. We're sending it in so it can be judged, means that there's some feedback to go forward.
Exactly.
And
Right.
I will say, because we measured it at 69.5, and if she measured it around 70 or 70.5, that's an example of what happens after relaxing. So you do want to do your sampling, let it relax before you take your final measurement.
and maybe like 24 or 48 hours.
Yeah.
So that it can fully relax. So that you actually have a good idea of what's going to happen when
What happens in real life?
I'm measuring it.
Okay.
So, all right, and then finally, team number 1. Again, you guys,
This one disqualified again, 67 inches. And the minimum requirement here for the woven cloth is 72. So it's well short. So sadly a disqualification. And, some of the inconsistencies in the weft yarns also will have impacted that draw in. The warp yarns were quite good and balanced, so that gave the weaver a lot to work with.
also because this particular shawl spread out quite a lot at the beginning. It was actually wider at the beginning. That's also going to impact the overall length.
Yeah, that will actually have sucked up
Because
some more.
we have this sort of thing that happens with length and width, and if you increase the width, you will decrease
Usually,
the
yeah.
length, generally speaking. So that would have also impacted the overall length of the shawl. So
So keep going, folks, and more sampling would have given you a better idea about the color versus pattern. Keep in mind that humans are designed to look for color and pattern. It's kind of basic survival. Is it a lion or is it grasses blowing in the wind? We needed to know the difference. So the human eye will default to color every time, which makes color and pattern challenging. Does the pattern still show up with the color placement chosen? Your eye will go to the color and you'll lose all that lovely work of the pattern.
all right.
Okay, thank you. And we are now ready to move on to our top 2, the 2 that qualified in place. But let me first say, if anybody has questions out there, we will take some Q&A afterwards. So feel free to pop those into the Q&A. We already have a couple in there. So Kaye and Sand are definitely going to stick around when once we reveal these and tell us a little bit more about sheep to shawl and techniques we can use and things like that, as well as answer questions, whether you have one about a particular shawl. They have the shawls right there in front of them. So if you have a question, say, oh, what does this look like? Or, how does this look? They can hold up and, answer specific questions about each of the shawls as well.
Yes.
Okay, so here we go. I'm going to hit play on this. This is going to roll for just a little bit with these 4 shawls. And then again, we'll go to white and
They're lovely offerings, by the way. I do think they're all quite lovely.
So yeah, keep working, keep competing. You guys are doing fantastic. Just put a little more warp on.
Yeah, that's a good way, especially when you're practicing. A good way to do that is put a slightly longer, not a crazy long warp. Don't put a 20-yard warp on, but put a little bit longer warp on so you can do some practice first. And don't be afraid to cut that practice off and finish it.
and there we have second place.
Second place, we have Hangtown.
Congratulations, Hangtown. And I want to comment here that even if we had not quite so many disqualifications, this team, I believe, would still have been in the top 3. It's a beautiful shawl.
And I would love to see this after it was finished.
Yes.
But
Great. Your plying was so consistent. You know, the spinning was so consistent. Your plier just needs to ply up a little bit tighter, maybe take a little bit more time. But overall, well-constructed yarns in both warp and weft.
and very, very well done in choosing the layout of the warp and the pattern. That worked beautifully.
The little bit of errors in both the weft and the beat. So watch those edges, watch that beat. Weaver, slow down just a little and try to get exactly the same touch with your beat. And remember, we use the word beat, but it's really place. We don't really want to beat this
Because we're not making rugs, people.
right. But we also don't want to leave it so open that it's vulnerable. So you do need to pay attention to that. To that end, I have a tool to offer. Go get what's called a seam guide in sewing. It's a little metal piece that has a slider. I'm using my hands, but I realize you can't see them. Sorry. It has a little slider. And check and see. I leave mine set at 1 or 2 inches, and then I can count the threads of my weft in that distance and make sure that I'm still, if I aimed for 8 picks per inch, PPI, then I can make sure I'm still throwing 8 picks per inch and not suddenly 12 or 5, because that makes a big difference in your pattern showing up, because there is a little bit of wandering around here, but wet finishing would probably solve this one. The wandering around is not so big that the wet finishing wouldn't take care of it, I believe.
So congratulations, Hangtown. Well done.
Oh yeah, and keep up that hem stitching. Whoever did your hem
Yeah,
stitching.
your finisher is awesome.
Yes, hang on to them.
All right, and here comes
All right.
first place.
And you guys on the poll, you were right on top. It's Lamb Chop Spin Along. You guys did a great job.
Again.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, because this was last year's winning team, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was in fact last year's winning team. So you guys have, really, really bang on spinners. Your consistency in weft yarn is really good. Minor inconsistencies, but nothing that really knocked it out.
And I will say here, the choice of pattern, your choice of draft worked really well with the weft yarn, having occasional wobbles with multiple spinners. This is to be expected. I don't know how many spinners there were on this team, but the choice of the pattern helped a lot with that. So it's really not super noticeable. It's just a tiny, tiny figure. There's a tiny diamond figure, and that changes shape a little bit depending on the diameter of the weft, but it's not anything that detracts from the overall presentation of the shawl. And please, your finisher, hang on to them because it's amazing. It's great.
And the thing I would say to your weaver is get a little bit more waste yarn in there before you start the fabric, because you had a little splay at the beginning of the shawl.
And then a little tightening at the end. It's the, oh, I'm almost done. And then you tighten up and did it tighten up in both? Yes. So both we start beating as opposed to placing, because we're like, we're almost done. And then the weft pulled up a little bit. So we got a little bit of narrowing on the width, because you get excited, and just be very aware that the end of the shawl could have this effect on you.
The captain for Lamb Chop Spin Along has typed into the chat that there were 4 spinners on the team, and she is also the finisher and the weaver, so she appreciates the feedback. And
Well done. Yep.
I will also add, I think two of the shawls that you two gushed over the most were both from out of state. Lamb Chop Spin Along is from Washington State, and the other one, the Spin City, was from New York State, New York City area. So I think it's quite fascinating that we would not have, under non-COVID circumstances, have had these two shawls in our competition. So it's fascinating to be able to see these come in, and hopefully, I guess some of the California teams, we need to step our game up a little bit and make sure we're all on point. So it's great to have this challenge, and I'm hoping that both of those teams at some point can make a trip out and join us for in-person Lambtown Festival.
I
That's
really
awesome.
want to see this kind of shape to shawl continue, because I think it brings communities together in a way that we couldn't do otherwise, because flying 5 people out for a in person could be quite and there's all the complexities of the equipment as well. And so we got to see something here that we wouldn't have seen without being in this. So isn't that a bright spot to our current situation? Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a great picture. I love the way everything's framed. Let's see, do we have anything else to add about that one? The drape is fabulous. I love the choice of colors. Great use of BFL. The weft is a BFL cross Corriedale. Wonderful choice. The BFL softens the Corrie in that breeding, so it's a great combination. But the Corrie has really fabulous durability. I love both of those fibers. Personally, I have a bit of a bias toward BFL, Corrie, a bunch of the other not quite so uber fine as merino. Now there's merino in the warp.
Yeah.
The warp is a lovely combination of different fibers. You got BFL, merino, silk, cashmere, stellina. The cashmere, tiny percentages of cashmere change the hand, the feel next to your skin so much. You don't need a very high percentage. It's a great way to use luxury fiber. And the BFL gives you a good hand. That's how it feels next to your skin, but also durability because it's a little longer. The merino then gives you that lovely lofty softness. Silk, again, shine and durability. And I personally, being a bit of a magpie, find the stellina to be just perfect.
Playing to your audience.
Yeah. More sparkle.
Perfect. Now everybody knows. All right, just a little bit to catch Sam's eye, and that's how you get a couple of extra points on the.
Little bump up,
When
yeah.
this one came out of the bag the first time, I was just, oh, shiny.
I love it. That's good. So, all
All right,
well,
questions.
I was gonna say, I want to thank you both. It was really great job with the judging. I know it was difficult to have to disqualify 4 of them. One of them happens and you're like, oh, that's okay, and then it's just like, oh, but when you have that many measure up, that's really painful. And I mean, we've seen that happen in the in-person competition as well, where we've seen a handful of them or even just a few of them come out, and it's tough, but it's a learning experience, and hopefully it makes each of the teams better. And it's it's not a judgment of character or anything like that. It's just it comes off the loom, and it doesn't measure
I
up.
have seen sheep to shawls in person where even with 6, 7, 8 teams, only one of them qualified in length and width. I've seen that happen. It's very sad.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, true that. Okay, so I'm glad that you both have the shawl still in front of you, because the one question came in here. It says, what does Kaye mean by crawl out related to fringe?
Okay, so
Can you pull out that shawl that you spoke about and show us on screen, kind of a close-up, and then maybe explain what you're talking about and how to remedy it?
yes, let me find the right shawl.
So crawl out means that the yarn, either warp or weft, can literally crawl out of the fabric. And usually you see it start by creating little loops in the fabric. And when the finishing is not, which team was this? Sorry, I don't have the team names on there.
Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, it's this one. Yep. Okay, so
No, it's not. Is it that one?
yeah, it's this one, because this has the stitching is not even.
Oh, right here's a good
Yeah.
example. Okay,
So let me just see if I can get
the
this.
hem stitching is falling away from the fell line. There's a gap.
Here's the fell line.
Yep, there's a gap.
Here's the stitching.
It's
okay?
unstable.
So what happens now is I have this little area here in between that's not supported. So over time and
Those yarns are
wearing,
gonna stick
what
out.
will happen is this will pull backwards. It will pull through the stitching and it will pull into this loose area and it will create these little loops. And eventually those little loops will pull completely out. And then you will have a piece, threads from the warp of the shawl, which are completely unfinished. They don't have anything to support
And
the
the
end.
weft will start to collapse.
And
into
now,
that position.
right, so now the weft will start to slip down because there's nothing holding it in
And
position.
in fact, the weft will slip before the hem stitch knots come out. I will note one of the solutions when it's already done like this is to wet finish, maybe gently agitate the edges and try to get them to get a little bit of felting. This works as long as you don't have a superwash. None of these are superwash, but non-superwash fibers. You can make up again in wet finishing. You can kind of cover,
Massage it a
this,
little bit and
massage
get
a
it
little
to
bit.
like, not really felt,
Well,
but more kind of
full.
bloom and
True
full
full,
a
yeah.
little bit.
So like this part, I would
Up a
actually
little
have
bit, huh?
taken,
There you go.
I would have taken, I might take a fork, like a regular old dinner fork, and gently put those back up where they belong
As much as possible.
as much as possible. Then when it goes into wet finish, I get everything nice and soaked. And then I might spend a minute gently agitating it in the water. Not hard, but just enough to get it, the fibers to full up and open. And that might secure it. We did.
Oh, okay. That's the rainbow shawl.
Oh, nice.
Excellent.
So I would love to see the hem on this after it's wet finished. In fact,
That's going
this
to
one?
help. That's
Yeah.
definitely going to help.
Yeah.
But that's kind of so that's what crawling out or really means is, and the other thing to know about that particular term is that some fibers are more prone to it than others. This, because it's Shetland, and Shetland is a naturally sticky wool, this means that the crawl out is going to be a lot less, even given the fact that it's the stitching is far from the fell line in spots, than, for instance, rayon, which is probably the worst.
no, very well. Rayon,
chenille.
Rayon chenille.
Yeah.
That's the absolute worst
It'll
fiber for just
crawl out of anything. But so that's another thing to understand is the kinds of fiber that you choose will make a difference in how it sticks
For
together.
non-wool folks, I will point out there's a big difference then between mercerized cotton and unmercerized cotton. Unmercerized cotton will stick to itself.
You have some grip there.
Mercerized cotton, it's
Very
lovely
slick.
it's so easy to work because it doesn't have any slickness, but then it will just keep going.
So, Shetland is really good in that regard. A stickier wool, in fact, traditionally, a Shetland shawl probably wouldn't have any kind of finish at the end. It would just be fold and the ends would stay together. And I actually have a shawl that Sand made for me many, many years ago now. And I have worn it to death because it's my favorite. And it does not have any kind of finishing at the end at all. It's just left, and we just fold it. Got a little bit of opening up at the edge, and it has been nice and sticky and stayed exactly where we put it. So there's that. Next.
All right. Yeah, so the question here, you were just talking about the Shetland breed, and somebody says, which breeds would be good to start with, breeds that are particularly challenging?
Okay, so if you are starting to do this process for testing, Corriedale, Corrie crosses, preferably crossed with something like BFL. I'm quite fond of Polworth, although it can be challenging because it's actually a fine wool, so you have some of the challenges. What I would recommend against starting with is things that have cashmere, yak, Kiviot, super fine, or what they call now we're calling ultra fine merino, which has a micron count that matches cashmere. Micron count, by the way, is a measurement of how wide the diameter on the single fiber is, a single hair, basically. And the super or ultra fine merinos that are coming out that are bred to match cashmere micron counts, they're challenging. They're not as challenging as cashmere, but they actually have some of their own things. So don't start with that. And honestly, if you want a good wearing piece, so this is great for testing too, because it's going to hold up to all the things you do to it. Good BFLs.
Shetland is a pretty good one,
Shetland
too,
is actually a really good one. You have to be aware with Shetland, though, it has quite a crimp. So that springiness, you need to be particularly careful. And this is back to the length thing. Do not pull your warp too tight. You actually want your warp to have a bit of slack to it while you're pulling it on your frame or your mill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You want to make sure that when you're pulling the warp, you calculate to pull, say, a 3-yard warp. Well, if you pulled it too tight, what you actually have, you could have it as short as 1.5 yards.
Because wool stretches naturally.
Yeah.
So if you put tension on your warp as you're making your warp, then you're going to wind it onto your beam. And if you put too much tension as you weave, you're going to, then you kind of double down a little bit.
And that's where sampling is so critical.
But the bottom line is that that's probably one of the easiest ways of getting your warp too short is to pull it too tight on your board or your mill.
And I will comment that we're working with wools here because that's part of the point of a sheath shawl, right? However, if you pull say a cotton warp, and this doesn't matter whether it's mercerized or unmercerized, if you pull a cotton warp and you pull it too tight, you can break your frame. You can break your warping frame or mill because it's under too much tension. I actually have had the experience of having a student do that and cracked a warping frame.
Peg.
She actually cracked
the peg.
No, it was the
And
frame.
then the frame
Corner
cracked.
cracked. Yeah, and because she was just pulling so tight, and I,
And one of the reasons that people pull their warps tight is often because they feel like they need to be able to keep their threads in order.
And you do that with other methods. You
but
do
that's-
it in how you beam on, in putting choke ties if you use them, in using a way to keep the cross that actually keeps it orderly. So there's a whole bunch of ways, and whether you warp front to back or back to front, there are a variety of ways to do that, but don't pull the warp too tight or you're going to lose your length.
And it also just stresses this yarn.
And the weaver.
So yeah. All right.
Yeah, so one last question, and if anybody has any other questions that have come up in the meantime, feel free to pop them in. We've still got some time here. The question came up on the Del Oro shawl. When you look at it from the side, it looked like it was a blue shawl, and then when you look at it from the front, it looked like it was yellow.
Which team is the Del Oro?
I know which one it is. It's the only one that was yellow.
Yeah. So what causes that effect? Is that something we're trying for, or is that something that is a part of the design?
Can you restate the question again?
Yeah. So when in the photo, sometimes when you look at it from the side, like when you look at the as it's draping, it looks like it's a blue shawl. But then when we looked at the kind of the face on view of the cloth, it looks yellow.
Okay. So that's actually a positive quality, and it's called iridescence. It's the result of that. And iridescence, if anybody thinks about beautiful shot silks, and you hold them up and they kind of ripple with color and they look purple here and they look blue here, and they look a little bit, that effect is called iridescence. And
It can be a very desirable effect.
Yeah. Hold it up so we can see a detail of the. So here we're going to hold it up to the camera so that you can actually, and our lighting in here is causing the whole shawl to look blue. It's losing the purple completely. Sorry about that. And the yellow is still there, but the purple's gone because it is actually.
So the warp is dyed turquoise and purple, and the weft is yellow. So what happens when you look at iridescence is you're looking at the interplay of the warp and the weft colors. And that has to do with, for lack of a better quick term, the level of pixelation. So when you weave, you are moving threads over and under a warp. And the number of threads that you cover or leave exposed as you go through your pattern will give you your pixelation level or your mixing level, how many threads. So plain weave is the maximum.
There's actually a navy in here too.
When you go 1 over 1 under, you mix your colors completely.
Optical
And
color
so
mixing.
that's called optical color mixing. And that also can be used very effectively to create this iridescent effect. The longer the floats are in the draft, the more you can have chunks of specific color. So less optical mixing, more separated color. This particular shawl does a lot of optical mixing, but it doesn't actually do it super effectively because the color choices obscure the pattern.
And again, that's a sampling problem.
So what's happened is it has optically mixed when it wasn't intended to, which caused some iridescence.
Now, I do want to point out, having just taken the shawl out to look at again, I would hazard a guess that there were not floating selvages. Twill patterns almost always have to have a floating selvage, or you need to be very conscious to pick your selvage threads. If it had a floating selvage, then it wasn't weighted enough, but you can consistently, it raise up a little, consistently see throughout the shawl, there is catch, catch, loose, catch, catch, and then there's another loop in the next little bit. You really need to watch that because it becomes a vulnerability point. Also can change the width of the shawl because it may lettuce over time at the edges, because where the edge thread is not caught, it just walks right out, and then its friends walk with it.
So yeah, so that's what happens with when you see a different color at a different angle.
Yeah.
That's called iridescence, and that's how it happens.
It's actually really good quality.
Did that answer the question successfully?
I believe it did. That was a wonderful. I like that it wasn't short. I like that you went into depth and fully explained it to somebody who has no idea what's going on. So that's wonderful.
I'm a big fan of iridescence, so I often work toward iridescence in a lot of things.
Another resource for people, if I can like pimp somebody for just a second.
Go for it.
Because I work with her. Tian Chu, and her website is warpandweave.com, does a series of classes on color in weaving specifically, and they're very good. And they will teach you how to not have this happen with your beautiful shawl. And they, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So
the comment is, I think the Del Oro were working toward iridescence in their shawl. So
yeah. So at any rate, yeah, that's a good resource to kind of take a peek at. She does regular free weave alongs, as well as has more in-depth classes.
Yeah.
So it's a good way to learn about color. That's her speciality. She spent an enormous amount of time learning about it, and how, things like how your brain processes color, and so how that impacts what you do on your loom.
And I will say that this is again part of the taking time to make time, take time to sample, take time to practice, take time to learn new skills. You will be so much happier out the other side having invested that time, and then you don't end up with what feel like mistakes. So an entire shawl that comes off and you look at it, oh, it's mud. Everything's gone. Everything I was trying to do with it. And inevitably, that's the one that was like, oh, it was this precious fleece from the sheep that's gone and I can't get any more. So taking time to do practice and expand your mind and learn from people who've already, you don't have to reinvent everything every time. I'm a person who tries to do that all the time. And so it's really good to look at what other people have learned.
I love it. Well, thank you for mentioning that additional resource. And for those of you who are looking at the chat, we did put the link to that, warpandweave.com, in the chat. So that's available there. And I also want to mention your company. I mean, it's obvious that the two of you know what you're talking about. You've been in this fiber arts community and working on this for more than 2 decades now, and you know, it's been fun to follow your own progression and you know, local yarn store owners and you know, now with you, now with your own company, Stonewater Arts, and we'll get yep, there we go, that's in the chat as well, stonewaterarts.com. So I really wanted to say thank you once again. This has just been wonderful. It's so good to be able to have you as a resource here in Northern California for us, and be able to have you give all this positive and you know, encouraging feedback to all the different teams, even those not in our backyard, right? So
I do want to reiterate, I think both of us, please keep going, folks. Keep trying. Keep making.
Keep weaving.
yeah.
Yeah. There's nobody that I would say stop, don't do this anymore.
Oh,
no,
no,
please keep doing, keep
This
learning.
is how you learn.
You know, keep making those beautiful things.
Yeah.
And thank you, Roy, very much for inviting us back again. We've had a really fun time doing this. It's really,
you're more than
great for us.
welcome. You are more than welcome. We really appreciate having you. So I think I will we'll start wrapping up here, and so if anybody has anything they want to, you know, toss into the chats, feel free to go for it. We are next up here, we will have the lamb cam, or the sheep cam, live from Meridian Jacobs. So that'll be flipping over in just a second here. But before we go, if you enjoyed this presentation, or if you have a friend who missed it, it will be available within the next couple of weeks on the Lambtown Festival YouTube channel. So that's a great place to watch it. And if you missed Kaye and Sand's judging last year, that is also on there as well. So it's one of those things where if you're brand new and you're like, well, I think I might want to do this, and you know, just listening to the two of them is a great way to pick up feedback and little pointers about you know, what you might want to do or incorporate into your own projects, whether you're weaving for a competition or just for yourself. And so you know, feel free to go back and watch 2020, and then this year as well once it's posted. So that's my little shout out for Lambtown Festival YouTube channel. And
see, everybody use this as an educational opportunity.
yes.
And so these videos are great for that. Look at what other people have done and use that moment to grow yourself.
Yeah.
and get inspired, of course.
Yes, well, and that's what Lambtown Festival, you know, hopefully is all about. Where, you know, our mission is really education, and this weekend, you know, we hope serves as a inspiration or a jump off point for everybody for the other, you know, 362 days of the year. And the festival isn't over. We still have half a day to go here, so you can check out what's going on for the rest of the day. lambtown.org/schedule. That is in the chats as well. You can link right over to that and see what's going on. Like I said, we have lamb or sheep cam coming up next. Sorry, and then we'll have some vendor interviews, a break for some vendor open houses, a few more vendor interviews, and then we'll wrap it up with a community meeting. And I think that'll do it.
Thank you, Roy, for all your hard work here.
I feel like I'm forgetting something, and I am, and it's admission. lambtown.org/admission. And like I said, $5 a day. That's what we ask for. If you want to help us out by giving us a little bit more, we'd appreciate that. Keep our mission of promoting all things lamb, sheep, and wool related going on here. We would appreciate it.
Go shop, go shop, go shop.
That's right. Support our vendors as well.
Support our
huge.
vendors, yeah.
They are the backbone of this festival. And, you know, this would not happen without the money that we get from the admissions and our sponsors and our vendors. So please, you know, make sure to thank everybody that you can with your wallet when you can, or however you can. And with that, I will say thank you, Kaye and Sand, and we'll see you next time around.